Good evening, good afternoon, and good day, and welcome to another edition of our campaign diary and Q&A here for the Many Lands campaign on Slice and Dice. So today's is our first campaign diary of 2020. Going to be talking all about what went down in our previous session, which was on Monday. If you missed it, it's still up on our Twitch channel, so you can watch it for the next week or so. I'm just working on the highlights just before I came onto the stream. The highlights will be up hopefully later on today. And of course, if you have missed any further episodes in this campaign so far, you can find them all on our YouTube channel. It's all at Slice and Dice or Slice and D6 if you search that on YouTube. Or alternatively, if you're watching this now on Twitch, you can find the link straight to our YouTube channel. Just scroll down the page and you'll find it right there. Now, speaking of the Twitch channel in general, a couple of little things we've been tinkering away with over the last couple of months, actually. So first of all, our merch store is now live, and we have our offer for the month of January to cast away those January blues. You can now get 20% off of all orders in our merch store on Teespring using the code SADJAN20. This will give you 20% off of all orders through our store. So go and check it out and see what you'd like to buy from our merch stuff, and also support the channel, but also give something. You get something back in return, which is, you know, who needs charity when you've got that, right? So we've got two collections running so far. We've got our classic logo collection, which is with Slice and Dice t-shirts, Slice and Dice, just using the logo you can see on my left here, just that on t-shirts, on mugs. We've got phone cases, just pretty much all the stuff that we could come up with. I think tote bags, everything that was on Teespring that said, you can put your logo on this. We went, yeah, we're going to do that. So we've got that, and then we've also got our Party and collection, or Party ampersand collection, which is basically just a list of all of the characters all down on a t-shirt. So it goes I think Malar and Brucon and Nerys and Leobrin and Fleeting and Seth, just all of them on a line, looking very cool in that sort of Beatles tradition. Anyway, go check out all the stuff for yourself. There's a link to that as well on our Twitch page. In fact, there's a nice little extension from Teespring, which I think scrolls through some of the items so you can see them whilst still watching the channel, which is all good. So those are already set up, ready to go. We've also, I'm just working on at the moment what our subscriber stream perks are. If you have any thoughts on things that you'd love to get back by subscribing to the channel, what things you'd like to receive from subscribing, please let me know your suggestions either in the chat or contact us on social media. It's all at Slice and D6. You'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Shameless plug out of the way now. Let's jump into to session 24. Before we move on, so the that stuff I just mentioned about the about subscriber stuff, hopefully will be launched on Monday, but I will keep you in the loop. And final thing before I jump into the session, just want to say a big thank you to all of our most recent followers. We was actually quite shocked on stream looking back and finding people who'd started subscribing to the channel whilst we've been on holiday, which is an achievement in itself. So obviously somebody must have stumbled across and found the channel and went, yep, I would like to watch this when we get back in January. So thank you for that. So that would be for the Legend 27069, to Ian 9 out of 10, to Master J Speed, Jade Fury 0, and Retro Chronicled. Thank you all for joining. Really means a lot. Thanks for following us. So anyway, session 24, our first inaugural session back, and it was quite a nice intro for me because it wasn't too combat heavy. There was a lot of role play stuff that I really enjoy anyway, but also there was a lot of opportunities to kind of wrap up what had just happened before Christmas, but also then kind of progress the story forward into the next chapter. And as a DM, I know I was dropping a few little hints of lore and stuff like that, just peppering the landscape with imagery and so on, which some of which the players would have picked up on, other things that they won't have, and that's what this stream is all about. This video. So basically, the first part was our characters waking up from the dream they had, where they genuinely met a god. They met Festir, who otherwise goes by the name Steve, after fighting the frost giants that he had sort of created for them to fight as a test to see how far along they had come and to see if they really are as strong as they need to be to fight in the war that is to come, so he said. So the characters were reeling a little bit about this, sort of trying to process all this information, particularly Malar, the Loxodon cleric, because he is one of Festir's chosen. He has been a follower of Festir and the Eight as long as, well, pretty much all of his life. So the fact that he's meeting his literal god, his literal idol, like probably the most influential person in his life ever, he was just overcome, and DK, I think, milked and loved every single moment of getting to roleplay that kind of fanboying over the god, and that was certainly a lot of fun for me as well, to interact with that, and then having these other characters like, right, sure, you met a god, even though all of the players, of course, did, and it was a shared dream, and they all remember it. So it's a fun little interplay there. But then they kind of had this coming back to reality, where they've filled Gantbron's one of his chests. They've emptied out the chest and put inside this trunk. Essentially, it's like five feet wide. They have placed the doppelganger in there, who was posing as Neris for the entirety of their journey out of Hilberg. So they put them in that case. They need to deal with that, but eventually they can't just leave this doppelganger in there forever. They also had to deal with Hogarth, the innkeep, who had been taken hostage. He had been imprisoned for questioning by both the party and by Gantbron. And so it was kind of the party needed to decide what they were going to do with that. Now, I honestly thought that they would, going into the session, I didn't think much about it. I didn't think that they would do what they did, but players always surprise you. So you've got to be, I say be prepared for the unexpected, but you've got to be aware that the unexpected may well happen, because you can't prepare for the unexpected. That's an oxymoron, because anything that you prepare for, you expect. Anyway, so I was not expecting the party to decide, you know what, we'll take Hogarth with us. He's clearly implicit in all of this, or complicit in all of this, and he will know what the wine looks like. He's too much to do with this. Like, he needs to be arrested for his crimes. Let's take him with us. And because Oraglor, where they were staying, didn't seem to have any strong guard presence at all, especially when a genuine riot kicked off in the inn, nobody seemed to bat an eyelid. No help came. They kind of took the law into their own hands. So I was not expecting them to do that, and nor was Gantbron. Gant had made an arrangement with Hogarth that he would essentially let him have his inn back, let him kind of go about his business again, provided that Hogarth basically becomes eyes and ears for Gant, so a little reporter for him, and equally so reports matters of people going through Oraglor, essentially another pair of eyes to his spy network. But that was also then conditional that the party could all leave and go on their way, and Hogarth in exchange would not be reporting any of what's gone on to the local authorities or to anyone else. He would not speak of their travel, which on the face of it you think, okay, that's not a great deal, but actually, if he's saying that, if he's promising that he won't tell anyone that they came through, that includes even those who may not want well for the party. So I think that possibly was kind of slipped by unnoticed. But anyway, the party weren't interested in that. They thought that, and probably rightly so, that this guy had been involved. He had arranged for people to come and essentially kill anyone asking questions about the wine that had gone missing. And again, I think the party may have exaggerated this, because originally the thugs are actually just meant to beat up party members. They're not actually meant to kill them, but suddenly things kind of escalated, and when it wasn't going their way, I mean, I don't think they even managed to knock a single character unconscious. So the thugs were really there just to beat them up, not to actually mortally wound them. But the party interpreted it that way, and that's how it goes. That's the line they're going with. They tried to kill us, so be it. But then I suppose the bigger issue with Hogarth is that he is involved in a plot which potentially will kill people, which is poisoning them with lycanthropy, turn them into werewolves, which inevitably could lead to murder. But even if murder isn't involved, that in itself is pretty criminal. So he should be reprimanded. From a especially from a lawful good standpoint, he's done wrong. He should be arrested. But Gant doesn't operate like that. Gant is kind of more self-interested and more morally grey. And so for him, it made more sense actually to let him go and then for him to use him for his own means later on. He was also hoping that might smooth things over and make travel for the party easier, not only on the way, but perhaps later on as well. So anyway, that was what the party decided to do with Hogarth. But then they also had their two captives in the storage cupboard, essentially, in the Miner's Arms. And that was Alan and the other one, which they didn't get a name from, but Seth stole his tricorn hat, which was too big. Seth, after discussing with the party, then decided to let them go, but decided to strip them naked because... And I don't understand why James said this. Wanted to strip them naked so that the village would remember their faces. Yeah, I think they remember their faces more with their clothes on, really. They might remember other aspects if they're naked. But anyway, that's what he decided to do. So, and the other two weren't going to complain because they were tied up and they'd been locked in this storage area for, well, over 9 hours. So they had tried sleeping and they'd also had to relieve themselves as well. And obviously being tied up, they couldn't move. So yeah, not a nice atmosphere in there, as Marshall pointed out at the time, that wouldn't have been pleasant. But anyway, they decided to let the two of them go. But first they put the fear of God into them by tapping them both with the Rat King staff. This was all a ruse. It wasn't actually casting a spell. But basically, Seth bluffed his way through by saying that if they commit any crimes or do anything or attack anyone, but who, unless they're defending themselves or were attacked first, if they attack anyone, the rats will consume them, as they did the third thug, who was, of course, ripped apart and killed by the rats. They've seen the evidence of what the rats can do. They're not going to mess with it, and so they just run off on their way. Whether that will last the rest of their lives, who knows? But Alan and the other one off into the wilderness, set free and naked currently. So with that all tied up, the group then decided to head on to their next destination along the route, which was Heroes Landing. So travelling along, now for travelling, I think that a lot of D&D campaigns will skip over the travel sections and will go just straight to when you get to the next destination. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity missed there for fun and for memorable moments. So I will generally roll for random encounters when the group are travelling, but in order to make it more streamlined, there's just one roll for the entirety of that day. If they were to go on multiple days, I make them roll once, then in one day and once the next day. I say make them roll, I roll for them to, while they roll perception checks and whatnot, I will roll to see if a random encounter will happen, and I've got my parameters for when I roll a d20, what number needs to be reached for a random encounter to happen. Once I do roll for a encounter to happen, I then take some other dice to roll to see what encounter happens. And I have a table all neatly written out for this. And you'll find with modules for D&D that they have exactly the same thing. They'll have these tables for random encounters. I think there's one in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which I think is a really good reference point to take. It's just easy enough to make on an Excel spreadsheet or similar, just to make it this random encounters and just have this kind of in your back pocket as a DM, just to kind of bring an air of chaos, an air of unpredictability to your campaign, so that it's not just following the same plotline the whole way through. And often from random encounters, when you start embellishing the description with other things that are happening, you can also find these other little threads that the party then tie on, and it could be something that you could use for a story point later on, or it could lead to some other quest. So there's always potential there with random encounters for so much more to happen. It's kind of like a melting pot, a petri dish of potential life, I like to think of it. So anyway, that being said, the group carry on en route and they suffer no trouble at all on this 9 hours travelling. Rolled for a random encounter. Nope, didn't get a random encounter. Nothing happened. So soon enough, we skip ahead and they arrive in Heroes Landing. This was kind of like a seaside village, and I wanted there to be a real contrast between Oraglor and Heroes Landing. And I think that came across in the feel for it. More affluent, there was more together. There were guards for one thing, which there definitely weren't in Oraglor. And whereas I described Oraglor as being kind of decrepit, dilapidated, this is quite the opposite. It was more affluent. There was more more wealth, but also it seemed better living conditions. And the inn itself seemed a lot more welcoming, a lot more charm to it, as well as also touching on the lore once again. You may have noticed that with every inn, pretty much every inn so far, or a lot of significant buildings, there has been some kind of mural or some other kind of painting somewhere that the group then notice, or an other item that the group notice, which then has a bit of description about it and seems to tug on the past, the lore of the land. And this happened again with the inn, the Weary Traveller, which also had a mural inside on one of the back walls. This one, unlike the rest, which seemed to be more alluding to some kind of dragon, a red dragon usually. This time there was a halfling on a boat sailing heroically, like a dashing hero standing at the prow of his ship as it sails along the Star Sea. Again, it adds to the lore. And there's a definite connection between Half-Rage and to Heroes Landing. And actually, although I said this in the stream, it was deliberate because those two places are actually well connected, because they have one heroic figure that connects the two of them, which I guess is what this stream's for, so I'll say it. So Inelson, who is a famous halfling from the time of legend, his main thing that he did was that he came to the rescue of the dwarves in Burikrin when it was under threat from the dragon armies of Ruchir, and including the great red dragon Ushtag, who was the leader of the dragon armies, and quite a tyrannical Ushtag the Deceiver, he was called. So Inelson came across the Star Sea in his ships along with a load of other halflings. They settled in Heroes Landing before moving further inland, and Inelson himself eventually founded Half-Rage, Morning Ill and Half-Rage. Half-Rage had a tower built to commemorate Inelson. I think it's called Inelson's Watch, where yes it was, and the inn, as you may have picked up from way back in the campaign, the inn in Half-Rage is also called Inelson's Rest, and it's called that because that's where Inelson came to rest on his way up to Morning Hill. And he also used Morning Hill and Half-Rage as a stopping point before he went towards the border to Ruchir. And basically what he's famous for is that Inelson negotiated a peace treaty with Ushtag, and so he managed to do what no dwarf had done and no other person of the time had managed to do, which was to negotiate with the dragon and get him to leave them alone. He essentially saved Burikrin in that sense. So that was the dashing figure that's painted on the ship in the mural inside the inn. Just a lovely little texture thing, and I picked up on this originally from reading a couple of pre-made modules, pre-generated modules, and just seeing like some of these interesting little descriptions of certain things within a building that seem to tie to a bigger world. I think it's a really nice way of reminding your players of the world they live in is organic. It has a history behind it, but it also gives something visual that then it can help paint a picture for the players in their minds as well. So I think so I've really enjoyed like using, I think I've leaned on murals maybe a bit too much, but I really like what it offers to this campaign. And it seems to be a theme, I think, at least of Burikrin, that murals, would be the kind of art that they would be interested in. So anyway, they had some interesting characters within the inn, including the band, the Merry Men of Morning Hill, who had travelled from Morningill and had gone through Halfreich, where they picked up a well-known familiar face, Brucon's nephew, who he left in Halfreich, called Rudy. And they picked him up to basically take him on as their roadie, as he had nowhere else to be. So we now have Rudy the Roadie, much to the players' and characters' dismay, because Rudy causes a lot of problems. It's quite loud and quite irritating. But they, nevertheless, fate has bequeathed that that Rudy will also be heading to the ball with the Merry Men of Morningill. So it's nice to kind of for the players to then have other characters that will then be familiar to them when they arrive at the ball. I thought that again it was a nice little touch, because of course there are going to be other people travelling to this ball around the same time as they are. That makes perfect sense. So they met the band, and also they had. Well, speaking of Rudy, he had been gambling away his money to a pirate sailor type. He's definitely a pirate, called Francis Seaberg, who had been basically conned him out of all his money just by playing a made-up game called Three-Legged Donkey. Yes, I genuinely wrote out some rules for Three-Legged Donkey. If you want to make up a card game or dice game or something like that for your world, base it on a real one, and then just change a couple of things just to make it your own. That's what I did with Three-Legged Donkey. It's going to save you a lot of time. Otherwise, you could spend literal hours designing something that the players don't even use. So, for instance, on Monday, I designed Three-Legged Donkey, and then they didn't play the game. If I had spent hours creating that and they didn't play it, I would have been a little bit annoyed. But as it was, I'd spent literally 10 minutes on it. I'd gone, okay, this would be like Texas Hold'em Poker or Three-Card Brag. Three-Card Brag it was for this, but coming up with a well-known game that you're already familiar with and going, okay, we'll take that and then I'll just change this and this and this, and there we go, done. Simple. Anyway, he had been conning Rudy out of all of his money through gambling, and so it was kind of a moral choice for the party as to whether to get involved or not. And to be fair, they didn't seem particularly interested to be involved. The main one who probably would have felt like they had a stake in it would have been Brucon, which is Rudy's uncle, which is obviously played by Bart, who wasn't here this week because he was away in Marrakesh. He's now back, but that's fine. So even so, with Bart not here, I thought playing Brucon tends to take the middle ground, tends to kind of consider both sides and isn't rushed in making his decision. And this works because it means that it doesn't feel like I'm railroading, and I didn't. It's because I can then kind of defer the decision to the rest of the party. So eventually, it was actually James who then decided that he wanted to get Fleeting Look involved, because Fleeting Look has this really cool charlatan's die that he can roll, and he can make this die roll to whatever side he wants it to. It's a very neat trick and could be used to great effect. However, couldn't propose any dice games because he didn't know any dice games, and besides which I don't know how many dice games only involve one die, so that kind of backfired quite quickly. But there was a backup option in case they didn't want to play cards or they were going to be uncooperative, but trying to help Rudy nonetheless, and that was to beat Francis in a fist fight. Now, if they had done this fairly and squarely, then probably wouldn't have batted an eyelid about this. But it was interesting because I think with James kind of wanting to play more to characters' strengths and that kind of power gamer kind of style, realised that Seth was not going to be very good in a fist fight because he's not particularly strong, and he can't use sneak attack on unarmed strikes. However, Fleeting Look, who is with him, as it turns out, paladins can put smites into their weapon attacks, and that weapon attacks can include unarmed strikes. So at least in this instance, I allowed that to happen, which meant that basically with one punch, he reduced Francis to half his hit points, and then he decided to use Hellish Rebuke on him as well, the tiefling feature that can only be used I think once a day, which of course is not how you fight a fist fight. You don't set somebody on fire during a fist fight, but hey, I think this was, I wanted to kind of go with it anyway. It was a fun kind of characterful thing to do, but also Francis Seaberg, being a bit of a pirate, is not one to exactly follow the rules himself, and so being set on fire, although it didn't knock him out, it did reduce him to 1 HP. He decided on that happening that, do you know what, fair enough, you win, here's the money. that was underhanded, and I like it. Was essentially what Francis was saying. So yeah, that was a good, fun little part of the episode, and we also had a slightly more mystical element. Now, Malar had once before done a reading where I essentially used tarot cards to kind of help him see the past, present, and future, just to predict, or it was, sorry, weal or woe. That was it. It was to predict whether a future event would be good, bad, or somewhere in between, and that seemed to have didn't really glean a lot of results when he used it, but so it was kind of a change on that this time, like genuine sort of fortune telling tarot reading. By having this barmaid, I say barmaid, she was an elderly lady, the mother of the owner, who's tending to the bar, placing these cards down, and after enough time sort of playing up this character who seems to judge everything by the cards, like what am I going to eat tonight, she'll just look at her cards and see what that tells her what to do. I think the players eventually took up the bait, and Leo Bryn and Marshall decided, yeah, you know what, I will have a free reading in exchange. I'm buying some wine, but I'll take a free reading, why not? Which was really fun to do, because now I'm not very au fait with tarot readings in general, so I don't know exactly what each card means because you can look it up online. You can see that like the 10 of Wands means this, blah blah blah. So I took it to be a more interpretational view, and when I took out the cards, I'd then see what was on the cards, and then use that as to kind of influence what would then be said. And it was a really nice kind of organic way of doing it, and I think that it got across a kind of a magical essence almost between myself and the player, because we were doing this live. I was genuinely, he could see me there pulling out the cards. I got him to wave his hand over it and place down each card and then see what it was, and then I could then elaborate based on that card. So he pulled the one of wands, or it was a club actually drawn that one, so said something to do with nature and some fight in his past, and basically could use those as a vehicle, use the cards as a vehicle to foreshadow what's going to happen in the future, but also to make to help with to foreshadow future events, but also to touch on Leo Bryn's past, because the players have said before they don't really know a lot about Leo Bryn, and Marshall has admitted that Leo Bryn doesn't really want to tell the players much about his backstory at the moment. He doesn't want the other characters to know that much. He's quite secretive, and that's fair enough. If that's what your character would do, you've got to commit to that. So it was nice to then kind of to go around that, to maneuver around that particular challenge by instead of actually telling the characters, instead of having Leo Bryn tell the other characters about his past, instead I could then sort of tug on it by referring to it in descriptions and through the readings on the cards, which the other characters wouldn't be present for, but the players at the table would be able to hear it, which means that they get a bit more of an insight as players, because the players have been respectful and haven't read each other's backstories. So it gave them an opportunity to kind of get a little bit more about Leo Bryn, about where he's come from. Obviously, I have read his backstory. We worked on it together, and so I know I can then pull out these little tidbits of information as and when, and just drip feed it to the party. And I think that they've certainly enjoyed that so far. So after an uneventful night at the inn, I say relatively uneventful, they then wake up the next morning and they head on towards Rachfell Manor. But before they leave, one other major plot point I forgot about was that they took Hogarth with them to Heroes Landing, and then immediately Malar went to seek out guards to have him put in a stockade, because this man had committed crimes, and he said attempted murder and all the rest of it, and wanted him to be arrested for his crimes and held until further notice. The guards were very obliging. It was nice to play. The stereotype for guards is that they generally are a bit terse and a bit uncooperative. So it was nice, and I think I did that with guards in the past and in other locations, but so I decided these ones are going to be a lot more receptive, a lot more earnest. And so when Brucon, when Malar then addresses them and says that he's a deacon of the eight and the rest of it, like they lap it up and they really sort of embellish him and really kind of pander to his desires, like, Your Holiness, of course, by the eight it shall be done. And that was a lot of fun to do. But essentially they agreed to take Hogarth to their stockade, which is inside the council chambers, because the barracks and the council chambers usually are located in the same building, Bureaucrat. It's just how it was designed. So Malar goes with them, gets them locked up, and then in the morning when they go to check on, I say in the morning, the time's working differently. It was in the evening because they sleep during the day and then they ride out at night to make sure they get to the party on time. It's all very confusing. Basically, anyway, when they go to leave, it was in the daytime. They then go by the council chambers and find that he's been released. And after using some suggestion, some spells, and some questioning, some line of questioning, they end up before the councillor of Heroes Landing, Councillor Smithberg, who reveals that, although without saying, that Gant Bronn was the one who ordered for Hogarth to be released. Gant Bronn being a lord from the Crowflies, very powerful, very influential figure, certainly more powerful than the councillor herself is, and basically she decided it's more trouble than it's worth. We'll let him go, and we don't want to provoke the Bronns into any action, because Bronn, as a city-state in the Crowflies, is well known for its spies and assassins. It's I say well known. It's whispered that they have prolific spies and assassins within their ranks. Not somebody that you want to piss off, essentially. So they agree, the guards, to let Hogarth go, and essentially Hogarth's heading now back to the Miners' Arms to take up his position, as had been agreed with Gant originally. This hasn't gone down well with the party, because this has cast more suspicion on Gant, because they kind of joined the dots, some of the party actually, that maybe Gant is one of the common denominators with this whole werewolf plot. He's the only one really that's been with them who has been in Hilberg when the lycanthropy poisoning happened, supposedly, and he's travelled the whole route since with them. They've been looking to find out who this Fang person is, and now suspicion seems to be going towards Gant. He's also going with them to the party, knowing full well that this poisoning, this lycanthropy spiking, is due to happen, which I guess makes him a little bit suspicious. They also know that he's a spy, or at least Malar knows that he's a spy master, and that he is. They all know that he's certainly morally grey, and not somebody you can trust lightly. So this has cast a lot of suspicion on him. Now I'm happy to continue with that and embellish that theory, even if it's not correct. I think I really like having those stories where there's that one character that just seems got to be the bad guy, but it's far too obvious that they're the bad guy, because either way, if it turns out they are the bad guy after all, and they seem like the prime suspect, and you'll be kicking yourself going, oh, I knew it was them. Or on the other hand, if it's the person who's far too obvious and it turns out they're not the bad guy, it's like, oh, what, and then there's that kind of, well, who was it? What? But I completely fell for it. So I love having that in those kind of murder mystery type stories, having those characters in there. I think in this case, Gant is certainly one that fills that role. Has he been behind it? No, that's too obvious. But has he? That's kind of what I've got the players questioning at the moment, and that feels good. So anyway, with Hogarth released, the party then continue on towards Rachfell Manor, basically lining everything up for next week on Monday, which finally, after a lot of travelling and a lot of sessions, we are here. The party are about to arrive at the ball and are hoping to thwart this lycanthropy plot. Marta's going to be back with us next week. Now, obviously, she can't play Neris because Neris is not there, because the person posing as Neris was, in fact, a doppelganger. The doppelganger is now sort of impounded and being tied up and put inside a trunk that has also been tied up. So they're not going anywhere, at least for now. Which you may be wondering, well, how is she going to be in the stream if she's not playing Neris? How's that going to work? Well, we have been having a chat, and we've made a new character, or she's made a new character, which I've kind of talked with her a bit about, to fit in with this campaign. So she will be playing one of the guests at Rachfell Manor, but just who? Well, we shall reveal that all on Monday here on the channel. Come join me for that along with the rest of the players. That's Monday at 6 p.m. GMT or Greenwich Mean Time, only here on Twitch Live. I hope to see you then. Thank you all for tuning in, and until next time, stay safe.